The grand hall was filled with the murmur of quiet conversations, the soft clinking of glasses, and the low hum of anticipation. This wasn't just any evening. It was an event that had drawn some of the most respected musicians, critics, and artists in the world. The kind of event where every guest was expected to impress, to show their talent, or at least their connection to someone important. It was a room where status was as visible as the finely tailored suits and dresses that filled the space. In the midst of all this glamour stood a renowned pianist. His name was known far and wide, not just in the world of music, but in the hearts of people who appreciated real talent. He had performed in concert halls across the globe, mesmerizing audiences with his precise technique and emotional depth. People admired him not only for his talent, but for his presence. He carried himself with the kind of confidence that made others want to listen when he spoke, to watch when he performed, and to be near him. He was the star of the evening, as he always was, and he knew it. He wandered through the crowd, exchanging polite greetings with other musicians and critics, shaking hands with a few familiar faces. He was well accustomed to these events, the flashes of cameras, the polite but eager smiles, the subtle competition that seemed to follow every conversation. He enjoyed the attention, but sometimes it was all a bit tiring. Everyone was so focused on appearances, on the image of success. It was rare to see someone who was simply there to enjoy the music, to be part of the experience without the need for validation. That's when he saw her. She was sitting quietly at the back of the room, a little to the side of the large, gleaming grand piano that had been placed near the stage. She didn't seem to belong. While the other guests were dressed in extravagant clothing, showing off designer labels, she wore a simple dress, modest and unassuming. She didn't seem to care about fitting in with the crowd. She wasn't talking to anyone, just sitting there, her eyes fixed on the stage, watching the performers with quiet admiration. The pianist found himself intrigued. There was something about her presence, something different from everyone else. She wasn't fidgeting with her phone or looking around the room to see who was watching. She was absorbed in the music, in the moment. There was a calmness about her, a peace that he couldn't quite explain. It made him want to know more about her. He was used to being the center of attention, but for the first time that evening, he felt a pull toward someone else. He was curious, something he didn't often feel at these kinds of events. Who was she? What was her story? And why, out of all the people in the room, had she caught his attention so completely? The more he watched her, the more curious he became. He made his way through the crowd and approached her carefully, not wanting to disturb the moment she seemed to be having with the music. He wasn't sure what he expected, but as he stood in front of her, he greeted her with a warm smile. "Enjoying the performance?" he asked, keeping his voice soft, not wanting to interrupt the quiet atmosphere she seemed to be enjoying. She looked up, startled for a moment. She hadn't expected anyone to speak to her, especially not someone of his stature. When she realized who it was, a flicker of recognition passed across her face. She gave a polite smile and nodded. "Yes, it's beautiful." There was a pause, and then she added, almost as an afterthought, "I've always loved music, even though I don't know much about it." The pianist smiled again, intrigued by her honesty. He had spoken with countless people who had pretended to know more than they did, who tried to impress him with their knowledge of the music world. But this woman wasn't pretending. She didn't seem to care about impressing anyone. Her words felt genuine, and he found himself wanting to know more. He sat down beside her, still keeping his voice gentle, trying not to overwhelm her. "So you love music, but you don't play?" She shook her head. "No, I've never been good at it. I tried once when I was younger, but it was never something I pursued. I just listen now. It's enough for me." He could tell she wasn't the kind of person to seek attention or approval. She wasn't interested in impressing anyone. She simply wanted to enjoy the music for what it was. It was a refreshing change from the usual crowd, where everyone seemed to be competing for recognition. She made him feel, for the first time that evening, like someone who truly understood the beauty of music for its own sake. "I understand," he said thoughtfully. "Sometimes the most important thing is simply to listen. Music has a way of speaking to us, even when we're not the ones creating it." She nodded, and for a few moments they sat in silence, both of them focused on the performance in front of them. It wasn't the kind of silence that felt uncomfortable or awkward. It was the kind that was peaceful, as if they were sharing the same space in quiet understanding. Finally, after a few more moments, the pianist stood up, brushing a hand through his hair. He felt an unexpected urge to do something spontaneous. He wasn't sure why, but he wanted to see if she would be willing to play, to see if she had any hidden talent. It wasn't about impressing anyone or showing off, it was about sharing a moment, something raw and unplanned. "Would you like to play?" he asked, his tone casual but kind. "The piano's right there, and I'm sure the crowd would enjoy hearing something different." She looked at him, unsure at first. She hadn't touched a piano in years, and the idea of playing in front of such an important audience made her nervous. She glanced at the grand piano, then back at him, her heart beating a little faster. She had never imagined herself performing at such an event. But his offer was innocent enough. It wasn't about showcasing her skills. It was just an invitation to share something she loved. "I don't know," she began, the hesitation clear in her voice. He smiled again, sensing her uncertainty. "It's not about being perfect," he said gently. "Just play for fun. No one's here to judge. I promise." She still wasn't sure. She hadn't played in so long, and the thought of doing it in front of so many people made her feel vulnerable. But there was something about the way he spoke, the calmness in his voice, that made her feel safe. It wasn't about proving herself. It was about enjoying the music, something she had done as a child, long before the pressures of life had made her set it aside. After a moment of hesitation, she stood up, her fingers nervously brushing the side of her dress. "Okay," she said quietly. "I'll give it a try." The pianist led her toward the piano, and the crowd, sensing something was about to happen, quieted down. The woman sat down at the grand piano, her fingers hovering above the keys. She felt a sense of nervousness wash over her, but she pushed it aside. She had loved the piano once, and for a brief moment, she let herself remember that feeling, the joy of simply playing, not worrying about the opinions of others. Her fingers found the keys and she began to play. At first it was tentative, just a simple melody she remembered from her childhood. The sound was soft, almost shy, but it was enough to grab the attention of the crowd. The room was silent as the woman's music filled the air, and for the first time that evening, the audience was not focused on who they knew or what they had achieved. They were focused on the music, on the raw beauty of the sound she was creating. The pianist stood off to the side, watching intently. He had expected a simple, casual performance, something to amuse the crowd, but what he was hearing was far more than that. Her playing was gentle, but there was a power to it, a quiet strength that reached deep into the hearts of those listening. She wasn't just playing notes. She was telling a story with each key she pressed, a story that spoke to something deeper, something everyone in the room could understand. As the woman played, the crowd grew still, captivated by the unexpected performance. The music wasn't flashy or technically perfect, but it had a certain magic to it. The crowd felt drawn in, unable to look away. The pianist, once confident in his own abilities, found himself captivated too. He couldn't help but watch, mesmerized by the simplicity and beauty of what she was creating. As the woman's fingers gently brushed the piano keys, a soft, melodic sound filled the room. At first it was almost as though she were testing the instrument, feeling it out like an old friend who had been left behind for years. But as the seconds passed, her playing grew more confident. The music, though simple, was captivating, not for its complexity but for its honesty. Each note seemed to express a deep emotion, something raw and unspoken. The pianist, standing off to the side, watched her closely, his interest growing with every passing second. He had been expecting a casual tune, something to fill the space, but what he was hearing was more than that. There was something unique in her playing, something he couldn't quite put into words. He had heard countless performances throughout his career, some perfect, others full of bravado, but this felt different. It felt real. As the woman continued, the audience, who had been quietly chatting or watching the other performances, began to take notice. At first they leaned in, unsure of what they were hearing, but slowly the room fell silent. All eyes were now on her, drawn to the music she was creating. It wasn't that the notes were the most technically advanced, but there was a depth to her playing that few had expected to hear. It was as though each sound she produced told a story, one that spoke of dreams and memories, of moments long forgotten. A few guests exchanged glances, whispering to one another, Who is she? One of them asked, their voice barely a breath. Where did she come from? The pianist stood in awe, watching as the crowd, once scattered across the room, gathered around the piano. They weren't just curious anymore, they were captivated. The woman was playing without hesitation now, her hands moving over the keys with a grace that seemed almost effortless. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She wasn't looking for applause. She was simply playing because the music was something she had always loved, something that had once brought her peace. The pianist took a few steps closer, drawn by the energy in the room. He had seen it all in his years of performing. Every kind of showmanship, every kind of technical brilliance. But what he was witnessing now wasn't about perfection. It was about authenticity. There was something in her playing that felt so pure, so honest, it left him speechless. He stood there for a few moments trying to make sense of what was happening. She wasn't playing anything grandiose or complicated, and yet she had managed to capture the entire room's attention. The sound of the piano echoed throughout the space, carrying with it an emotion that couldn't be explained by mere technique. The woman, now completely lost in the music, seemed unaware of the growing crowd. She wasn't worried about anyone judging her or whether she was playing the right notes. Her fingers moved across the keys with a gentle fluidity, each note flowing into the next, building on the emotions she was trying to express. As she played, the pianist felt an unexpected shift inside him. He had spent so many years chasing perfection, honing his craft to the highest degree. But here she was, playing from the heart without care for what anyone thought. It was humbling, in a way he hadn't expected. He had always been the one who was admired, the one who stood at the center of the stage, drawing the eyes of the audience. But now, as he watched her, he felt something he rarely felt in the spotlight. He felt small. He felt like he was just one piece of the larger puzzle of music, one note in the vast sea of sound. The woman's performance didn't have the usual bravado or perfection of a polished artist, but it was something far more moving. It was a gift of pure emotion, stripped down to its simplest form. There was something in the way she played that made him realize how much of music he had lost over the years. The sense of freedom, the joy of simply playing for the love of it. The crowd around the piano grew larger, each person drawn in by the raw beauty of the music. Some stood silently, mesmerized by the soft yet powerful rhythm, while others whispered to each other in astonishment. "She's incredible," one person said in a low voice. "I had no idea," another murmured, barely believing what they were witnessing. But the woman herself was lost in the moment. She didn't hear the murmurs, the whispers, or the growing applause. She was deep within herself, reconnecting with a part of her that had been dormant for years. It wasn't that she had forgotten how to play. It was that life had simply pushed her away from it. She had once been a young girl, sitting at the piano for hours, playing whatever came to her heart, but somewhere along the way she had put it aside. There were other things to do, other responsibilities. But tonight, as she touched the keys, the music had found its way back into her soul. As she played, the piece shifted. What had started as a gentle melody, a quiet exploration of the keys, grew into something more dynamic. The tempo quickened and her hands flew over the piano with more confidence, almost as if the music had taken over. She wasn't playing for anyone but herself, yet every note seemed to resonate with the crowd, drawing them deeper into her world. The pianist, still standing at the edge of the room, could hardly believe what he was witnessing. It was as if she had stepped into another world, a world where music was not about competition, not about technique, but about sharing a piece of one's soul with others. And in that moment he realized how much he had missed that feeling. He had spent his career perfecting every note, every movement, striving for technical excellence, but he had never allowed himself to simply play from the heart, to let the music carry him without worrying about its precision. The woman had shown him something he hadn't even known he was missing. As she neared the end of the piece, the room seemed to hold its breath. The music, which had been building in intensity, began to slow again, returning to its softer, more reflective state. The crowd was silent, their eyes fixed on her, waiting for the final note. And when it came, it was as though the entire room exhaled in unison. The final chord lingered in the air, the soft resonance of the piano fading into the silence. For a moment, no one moved. No one dared to break the spell she had cast. And then slowly the applause began. It started quietly, just a few people clapping hesitantly, but within seconds it grew louder, more enthusiastic. The pianist was the first to rise to his feet, his hands coming together in a genuine show of respect. He had heard countless performances in his time, but this was different. The crowd followed his lead, clapping with more energy now, the room buzzing with excitement. But the woman, still sitting at the piano, didn't immediately react. She sat there, her hands still resting on the keys, her mind still lost in the music she had just played. She hadn't been expecting applause, and it felt almost overwhelming to be the center of attention in this way. She had never sought it, never wanted it, but somehow it had found its way to her. After a few moments, she stood up slowly, her knees feeling a little shaky, and turned to face the pianist. He was smiling at her, his expression filled with admiration. She felt a flush of warmth rise to her cheeks, not used to receiving such praise. But there was something in his smile that made her feel like she had just done something important, something worth sharing. "You have an incredible gift," he said, his voice soft but filled with genuine respect. "That was extraordinary." She looked at him, a little unsure of how to respond. I don't know what to say," she said quietly. "I just played. It's been so long since I've done that." He nodded as if he understood. Sometimes that's all it takes. A little time to reconnect with what's always been inside. The woman glanced around at the crowd still applauding and felt a sudden rush of emotions. She had never expected anything like this. She had simply wanted to sit back and enjoy the music, but now she realized that the music had brought something out of her, something that had been hidden for far too long. The pianist smiled again, his expression thoughtful. "You know, if you wanted, I could help you take this further. You have something very special. You shouldn't keep it hidden." She hesitated, unsure of what to say. Could she really do something with this? Could she turn her love for music into something more? She had never thought about it before, but now, with the support of the pianist and the admiration of the crowd, she felt a spark of possibility flicker inside her. "I don't know," she said slowly, still trying to process everything. "I've never thought of myself as someone who could do that." He chuckled, shaking his head. "You don't have to be anyone else. Just be you, and let the music do the rest." The next few days felt like a blur for the woman. What had started as a quiet evening at a music event had turned into something she never could have imagined. The performance she had given, so unplanned and spontaneous, had left an impression on everyone in the room, especially on the pianist. She found herself replaying the moment in her mind over and over. How had she done it? How had she played so effortlessly, as if the music had taken control of her? It wasn't like her usual self-doubt, the hesitation that came whenever she thought about performing. No, that night was different. She hadn't been trying to impress anyone or perform for any reason other than the sheer love of the music. It had felt freeing, like a part of her had been awakened after years of silence. The day after the event, the pianist reached out to her, his message simple but full of encouragement. "I know this wasn't planned, but you have something special. I would love to help you explore that talent further. If you're open to it, let's talk more." She stared at his message, feeling a mix of excitement and fear. Could she really take this step? Could she pursue music in a way she had never imagined? She had always loved the piano, but life had led her down a different path. She had responsibilities, a job, and a life that didn't leave much room for anything else. Yet the thought of letting this opportunity slip away felt even scarier. What if this was the chance she had been waiting for? After much consideration, she agreed to meet with him. They arranged to meet in a small cafe near the music hall, a quiet place where they could talk without interruptions. When she arrived, she found him sitting at a corner table, his eyes lighting up when he saw her. His smile was warm and welcoming, and she immediately felt at ease. "I'm glad you came," he said, gesturing for her to sit down. "I know this might feel sudden, but I've seen something in you that I believe could go much further than just a one-time performance." She sat down, feeling a little nervous. "I don't really know what to say. I'm not sure if I'm the kind of person who can take music seriously. I've never thought of myself as a professional or someone who could perform on a big stage." He nodded, his expression understanding. "I get that. But sometimes it's not about being a professional or performing on a big stage. It's about letting the music flow, letting it speak for itself. And you have that ability. You just need to let go of the fear and the doubt that's been holding you back." His words resonated with her. She had always let fear guide her decisions, always doubting her own abilities. But something in his voice, the way he spoke with such confidence, made her think that maybe Just maybe. She had been holding herself back for too long. "I don't know if I'm ready for all of this," she admitted. "I've never trained, never really pursued music seriously. I've just played for myself." "That's all it takes to begin with," he said gently. "The rest can be learned. The most important thing is the passion, the connection to the music. And you've already shown that you have it." She took a deep breath, considering his words. It felt like a huge step to take, to go from playing in the quiet of her own home to possibly performing in front of others. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized how much she missed the piano, how much she longed for the connection she had with the music. She had always felt like there was something she hadn't explored yet, some potential locked inside her that she hadn't been brave enough to unlock. Maybe this was the time to try. "I'll give it a shot," she said, her voice more confident than she had felt in years. "But I don't know where to start." The pianist smiled, and she could see that his encouragement wasn't just about the music, it was about believing in herself. "Start with what you love. We'll figure out the rest along the way." They spent the next few hours talking about her background, about what she loved in music, what she felt connected to. They talked about her childhood memories of the piano, how she had played without thinking, without worrying about whether it was good enough. They also discussed the struggles she had faced over the years, life, work, responsibilities, and how those things had made her put music aside. But with the pianist's encouragement, something began to shift inside her. She realized how much she had missed music, and how much she had underestimated her own talent. She wasn't going to become a famous musician overnight, but maybe, just maybe, she could start small and see where it took her. Over the next few weeks, they began meeting regularly. The pianist guided her through some basic techniques, encouraging her to play every day, to reconnect with the joy she had once found in the piano. At first, she struggled with the routine. She had been away from the instrument for so long that it felt like she was starting from scratch. Her fingers didn't move as smoothly as they once had, and her confidence was shaky. But with each practice session, she felt herself getting better, more comfortable with the keys. The more she played, the more she felt a sense of peace wash over her. It wasn't about the performance anymore. It was about the connection. When she played, she was no longer distracted by the noise of the world around her. She was lost in the music, in the feeling of the keys under her fingers. It was the kind of peace she had been missing for years, and it felt like a part of her had come back to life. One day, after a particularly good practice session, the pianist asked her, "How do you feel now compared to when we first met?" She smiled, the answer coming easily. "I feel like I'm finally starting to understand what it means to really play. It's not about being perfect or about impressing anyone. It's about expressing something deep inside. I've never thought about it that way before." He nodded. "Exactly. That's what makes music so powerful. It's not about technical skill or impressing others. It's about sharing a piece of yourself, letting the music speak for you, and you've got that in spades." The weeks went by, and as the woman continued to play and practice, she began to feel a shift inside her. She no longer felt like she was just an observer of the music world. She felt like she was becoming a part of it. Slowly, her confidence grew. She started playing with more freedom, no longer worried about making mistakes or about what others might think. She was playing for herself, and that was enough. One afternoon, as they were finishing a practice session, the pianist turned to her and said, "I think you're ready." She looked at him, confused. "Ready for what?" "Ready to share your music," he said, his eyes lighting up. "You've grown so much in such a short time. I think you're ready to perform again, even if it's just for a small audience." Her heart skipped a beat. "I don't know if I'm ready for that. I haven't played in front of anyone in years." He smiled kindly. "It's not about being perfect. It's about sharing what you've learned, what you love. The audience will feel that, and it'll be a great way to start." The idea of performing again sent a wave of nervousness through her. She hadn't thought about playing for an audience, not since that night at the music event. But as she thought about it, the excitement began to outweigh the fear. She had spent so long holding herself back, doubting her own abilities. Maybe now was the time to step forward and take a chance. "I'll do it," she said, her voice steady but filled with anticipation. "I'm ready." The pianist's face lit up with a proud smile. "I knew you would be." The next few days were a whirlwind of preparation. She practiced every day, refining her skills and building the set she would perform. The thought of standing in front of an audience made her nervous, but she knew it was the next step in her journey. And as the date for her first performance drew closer, she found herself looking forward to it in a way she hadn't expected. This wasn't about impressing anyone or proving something to herself. It was about sharing her love for music and letting the audience experience it with her. And for the first time in a long time, she was ready to take the next step. The day of the performance arrived sooner than she had expected. She had spent the past few days practicing tirelessly, preparing herself for the moment she would step in front of an audience again. She had come a long way since that night at the music event when she had first played the piano in front of strangers. Back then it had felt like a spontaneous one-off moment, a brief escape from the life she had built. But now, as she prepared for this performance, she realized it was more than that. It was a step forward, a chance to prove something to herself. The venue was small, nothing like the grand halls the pianist had performed in. It was a cozy space, intimate and warm, with dim lighting and a small but enthusiastic crowd. Most of them had come to listen to the pianist, who was well known in the music world. But he had insisted she perform too, and as a result, a few people were curious about this woman who had caught his attention so quickly. She stood backstage, looking out at the audience. The room was filled with people she didn't know, each of them settling into their seats, talking quietly among themselves. The noise seemed distant, muffled by the thick curtains and walls. She had never imagined herself performing in front of an audience like this, especially not after so many years of silence. It had always been easy to let the fear of judgment hold her back, to keep herself hidden behind closed doors. But now, standing backstage, she realized that the fear no longer had a hold on her. She was ready. Her palms were sweaty, and her heart raced in her chest, but she was determined. She had done the hard work. She had practiced and pushed herself to improve. She had come a long way from that uncertain woman who had hesitated to touch the piano all those weeks ago. The nervousness she felt was natural, but it didn't scare her anymore. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about playing with passion, sharing the music she loved with others. The pianist appeared beside her, offering a reassuring smile. "You're ready," he said, his voice calm and steady. "Just remember, play for yourself. Forget about the audience. Just focus on the music." She nodded, taking a deep breath. The pianist had been supportive from the very beginning, helping her find her confidence, but now it was time for her to take the final step. She had to trust herself, trust the music, and trust the hard work she had put in. The moment was hers. The stage manager gave her a nod, signaling that it was time. Her hands trembled slightly as she walked to the piano, her feet carrying her with a mix of excitement and fear. The soft murmur of the audience grew louder in her ears, but she didn't let it distract her. She had spent so long hiding from this moment, but now she was here and she was going to take it. As she sat at the piano, she felt a wave of calm wash over her. The familiar sight of the keys, the feel of the bench beneath her, the quiet hum of the strings, it was all so comforting. She closed her eyes for a moment just to center herself. She wasn't thinking about the applause or the audience's expectations. She was thinking about the music, about how it had always been her safe space, her escape from the chaos of the world. With a steady hand, she placed her fingers on the keys and began to play. At first, the notes were soft, hesitant, but as the music filled the room, she felt the tension in her body begin to ease. The sound of the piano was like a conversation with herself, a way to express emotions that words could never capture. With every note, she found herself letting go of the nerves, letting go of the doubts. It was just her and the music, and that was all that mattered. The audience, sensing her vulnerability, fell silent. It wasn't a crowd that had come expecting fireworks or bravado. They were here to witness something honest, something raw. And as the woman played, they realized they were witnessing a performance that was more than just notes on a page. She wasn't just playing the piano. She was telling a story that spoke to something deeper than skill or technique. It was the kind of performance that reached into the heart, making every person in the room feel the music in a way they hadn't expected. The pianist, standing at the back of the room, watched her closely. He had seen many performances in his time, but there was something different about this one. She wasn't trying to impress anyone or chase perfection. She was simply playing from the heart, and that's what made her music so powerful. It wasn't flawless, but it was real, and that was what the audience responded to. As the woman played, she lost herself in the music. The nerves she had felt earlier began to fade into the background. It was as though the piano had become an extension of herself, the music flowing through her fingers as if it had always been there. waiting for the right moment to be released. She wasn't thinking about the next note or the timing or the audience. She was just playing. And in that moment, it felt right. The pieces she had chosen were familiar to her, songs she had loved for years, melodies that had always brought her comfort. But now as she played, she heard them differently. She heard the emotion in each note, the story they told, and the way they seemed to echo her own journey. Music had always been a part of her, but now she was finally allowing it to be a part of her life again, in a way that she hadn't for so long. As she reached the end of the piece, she allowed the music to slow, letting the final notes linger in the air, before gently pressing the last chord. The room was silent for a long moment. She sat there, her fingers resting on the keys, her heart racing in her chest. She wasn't sure what to expect, whether the audience would applaud or sit in stunned silence. But in that moment, it didn't matter. She had shared something real, something vulnerable, and that was enough. And then the applause began. At first, it was hesitant, a few claps here and there, but it quickly grew louder and more enthusiastic. The woman remained seated, her hands still on the piano, her eyes lowered as she took in the sound. The applause was overwhelming, and she wasn't sure how to react. This was what she had always feared, being in the spotlight, being judged. But now as the applause filled the room, she realized it wasn't about that. The audience wasn't applauding her skill. They were applauding the emotion, the connection she had made with them. And in that moment, she felt a wave of pride wash over her. The pianist stepped forward, clapping along with the rest of the room. "That was incredible," he said, his voice full of admiration. "You did it." She smiled, a little overwhelmed by the experience, but also grateful. It had been hard to take that first step, but now that she had, it felt like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She had faced her fear and she had come through it. And the best part was that it hadn't been about impressing anyone or being perfect. It had been about the music, about expressing something that she had kept locked away for so long. After the performance, people came up to her to congratulate her. Some offered words of encouragement. Others simply expressed their amazement at what they had just witnessed. She was humbled by their reactions, but more than anything, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. She had never expected to receive such an overwhelming response. The pianist joined her after the performance, his face beaming with pride. "You were amazing," he said. "I knew you had it in you." She smiled, still trying to process everything. "Thank you," she said softly. "I didn't expect it to feel like this," he nodded. "Sometimes the most important thing is just to play. Not for anyone else, but for yourself. And you did that." The woman felt a sense of peace wash over her. She had taken a chance, and it had paid off in a way she hadn't expected. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she was excited about the possibilities. Music was no longer something she had to hide from. It was a part of her, and now it always would be. The days after her first performance felt like a dream. The applause, the kind words, the feeling of connection. It had all been so much more than she expected. She had spent so long in her own head thinking about her fears and doubts that she had never allowed herself to imagine what it would feel like to actually share her music with others. But now that she had done it, she realized how much she had been missing. The pianist continued to be a steady source of support. After the performance, he was there to congratulate her, offering words of encouragement. He was also there to help her navigate the next steps, whether it was finding more opportunities to perform or just helping her improve as a musician. He had seen potential in her from the start, and now it was clear to her too. She wasn't just a woman who loved music anymore. She was a musician, someone who had something to share with the world. But the journey wasn't always smooth. There were still moments of doubt, moments when she wondered if she was good enough, if she truly belonged in the world of music. It was easy to slip back into old habits, to doubt herself when things didn't go as planned. But each time she faced those thoughts, she remembered why she had started in the first place, because the music called to her. It wasn't about perfection, it was about expression. It was about finding the courage to be true to herself.